The scream was not a choice. It was a raw, primal force that ripped its way out of my soul, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that seemed to shake the very walls of the delivery room. My body was a battlefield, and I was losing the war. Through a haze of sweat and tears, I looked for his face. I looked for Mark, my husband, my rock, the man who had held my hand through every LeMay's class and promised me, his eyes wide with sincerity, "We're in this together, always." And I found him. He was standing near the door, his face pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the back of a plastic chair. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the heart monitor, on the frantic, jagged lines that mirrored the chaos unfolding inside me. The baby's heart rate was plummeting with every contraction. My own blood pressure was skyrocketing. Alarms were starting to beep with a terrifying, insistent rhythm. "We're losing them both," a nurse said, her voice sharp and urgent. "We need to get her to an OR now. This is a full-blown placental abruption." Another wave of pain, more savage than the last, tore through me. I screamed again, and this time the sound was laced with a new, horrifying note: terror. I reached a hand out to him, a desperate, silent plea. "Don't leave me. I'm scared." NHI's eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw something that shattered me more than any physical pain could. I saw fear, yes, but it wasn't fear for me. It was fear of me, of this situation, of the blood, the screaming, the raw, messy, terrifying reality of life and death. It was the look of a man who had stumbled into the wrong movie and was desperately searching for the exit. And a team of doctors and nurses swarmed around me, shouting medical terms I didn't understand. They were unlocking the wheels of my bed, prepping me for an emergency C-section that was our only chance. "Sir," a nurse said to Mark, her voice firm, "we're taking her now. You can wait in the family lounge just down the hall." NHE didn't answer her. He just stared at me, his face a mask of pale, frozen horror. Then, as they began to wheel my bed towards the double doors of the operating room, he did something I will never be able to unsee. NHE let go of the chair. He took a step back, and he turned and walked in the opposite direction. NHE didn't go to the waiting room. He walked past it. He walked down the long, sterile hallway, his pace quickening with every step. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the elevators, jabbed the down button, and disappeared inside. NHE walked out. NHE walked out of the hospital while I was being wheeled into emergency surgery. He walked out while our unborn child's life hung by a thread. He walked out while my own body was failing. My fight for life and for the life of our baby was a fight I was now, officially, fighting alone. NIF, your heart is in your throat. Please take a second to subscribe and hit that like button. This is a story about the moment a woman realizes her partner is not a partner at all and how she finds the strength to become her own hero. Section 1, the promise of partnership. Mark's favorite word was team. He used it for everything. We weren't just a couple, we were Team Evans. When we bought our first fixer-upper, we were the renovation team. When we trained for a 5K, we were the running team. It was his mantra, the bedrock of our relationship, and I fell in love with that idea. I was an independent person, a freelance graphic designer who had built her own business from scratch. But the idea of a true partnership, of someone who would be in the trenches with me, was intoxicating. Mark was a project manager for a tech company, a man whose entire career was built on logistics, planning, and seeing a project through to completion. He was reliable, steady, and his calm demeanor was the perfect anchor for my more creative, sometimes chaotic energy. "There's no problem we can't solve, as long as we're on the same team," he'd say, and I believed him. NHI's proposal was a PowerPoint presentation. It sounds clinical, but at the time, it was charming. It had slides titled Our Shared Values, 5-Year Plan, and Synergistic Goals. The final slide was a picture of a diamond ring with the title, Project Forever Team. And I said yes, laughing through my tears. It was so perfectly him, so logical, so planned, so safe. When we decided to have a baby, he approached it like any other project. He created spreadsheets to track my ovulation. He researched the safest car seats months before I was even pregnant. He was the perfect co-manager of Project Baby. The pregnancy was easy, textbook perfect. Mark was the model father-to-be. He came to every single doctor's appointment, a notebook in hand to jot down questions and instructions. He assembled the crib with the focus of an engineer. He painted the nursery a soft, calming gray, his brush strokes even and precise. NBUT. Looking back, I see the signs I missed. His focus was always on the project, not the person. He was fascinated by the logistics of the pregnancy, the growth charts, the fetal development week by week, but he was deeply uncomfortable with the messy, unpredictable reality of it. When I would talk about my fears of childbirth, he would get a tight, uncomfortable look on his face. "Don't worry," he'd say, patting my hand. "We have a birth plan. We'll stick to the plan. It will be fine." NHE hated it when I was sick. The few times I had morning sickness, he wouldn't comfort me. He would leave the room, unable to handle the visceral reality of it. He saw my physical struggles not as a part of the process, but as a deviation from the project plan, an unwelcome, messy variable he couldn't control. Our birth plan was a laminated, multi-page document, complete with color-coded sections and contingency flowcharts. It was Mark's masterpiece. It detailed everything from the playlist for the delivery room to the snacks he would pack in the hospital bag. It was a document designed to impose order on the most chaotic and primal of human experiences, NTHE. One thing it didn't account for was reality. NTHE night. I went into labor. Everything was, at first, going according to plan. The contractions were manageable. We drove to the hospital calmly. We checked in. We got settled in our room. Mark was in his element, checking things off his list, setting up the speaker, arranging the snacks on the table. He was the perfect project manager, NBUT. Then the project went off the rails. The pain escalated with a terrifying speed. The baby's position was wrong. The calm, serene birth we had planned for devolved into a medical emergency. And the project manager, the man whose entire identity was built on planning and control, was faced with a situation that was spiraling into chaos. The plan was useless. The spreadsheets were irrelevant. This was no longer a project. It was a crisis. And as I screamed, as the alarms blared, as the doctor shouted, I saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't my partner. He was a project manager whose project was failing, and his first and only instinct was to abandon the project and walk away from the disaster. Section 2. The silence of the lounge-end THE world became a whirlwind of green scrubs and metallic instruments. I was awake for the C-section, a blue curtain shielding me from the reality of the surgery, but I could feel the tugging, the pressure, the terrifying sensation of my body being controlled by others. My mind, however, was not in the operating room. It was in the hallway. It was replaying that moment, over and over. The look on his face, his back as he walked away. The closing of the elevator doors. NHAD. I imagined it. In my pain and fear-addled state, had I misinterpreted? Surely not. Surely he was just down the hall, in the waiting lounge, pacing and praying like any normal husband, any normal father-to-be. He was just scared. That's all it was. He was scared. Then I heard a cry, a thin but furious little wail. "You have a beautiful, healthy baby girl," a voice said from over the curtain. Relief, so potent and overwhelming it felt like a physical wave, washed over me. She was alive. She was okay. The project, despite the catastrophic failure of its manager, had a successful outcome. They stitched me up and wheeled me to a recovery room. I was groggy, sore, but my mind was clearing. My first question to the nurse was, "My husband, is he outside?" NTHE nurse, a kind woman with warm eyes, gave me a gentle, pitying smile. "I'll go check for you, honey." NSHE was gone for a long time. When she came back, her face was carefully neutral. "There's no one in the family lounge right now," she said softly. "Maybe he stepped out to make a phone call or grab a coffee." NBUT, I knew. The cold dread that settled in my stomach was a truth I could no longer deny. He wasn't making a call. He wasn't getting coffee. He was gone. NTHE nurse must have seen the look on my face. She pulled up a chair. "My name is Linda," she said, "and for the next 8 hours, I'm your nurse. And that means I'm on your team, okay?" There was that word again. Team. But coming from her, a stranger, it held more weight, more sincerity than it ever had from my own husband. I started to cry, silent, hot tears streaming down my face into my hair. Linda didn't say anything. She just handed me a tissue and sat with me in the quiet humming room. They brought my daughter to me a little while later. They placed her in my arms, a tiny, perfect bundle wrapped in a pink and blue striped hospital blanket. She had a full head of dark hair, just like his. I looked at her perfect, sleeping face and my heart cracked in two. I had never felt a love so immense, and I had never felt so profoundly, terrifyingly alone. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital in a state of suspended disbelief. I kept expecting him to walk through the door, a sheepish look on his face, a story about how he'd had a panic attack, how he was so sorry. I checked my phone constantly. No calls, no texts, just silence. NHI's parents called, their voices frantic. "We can't reach him, Amelia. Do you know where he is?" "He's not answering his phone, and I think he left," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Left? What do you mean, left?" "Left the hospital?" his mother asked, confused. "Yes," I said, "and I think he left me." NTHE day I was discharged. The nurse, Linda, helped me get my things together. She wheeled me and my daughter, who I had named Grace, down to the hospital entrance. My parents were there, their faces a mixture of joy for their new granddaughter and furious, heartbroken anger at my husband. And as we stepped out into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, I felt a sense of unreality. Just a few days ago, I had walked into this hospital as part of a team. Now I was walking out a single mother, the sole member of a team I never asked to lead. My fight for life had been won, but I was just beginning to realize that my fight to build a life was just beginning, and it was a fight I would be fighting completely on my own. Section 3. The project plan for 1NTHE, first few weeks at home, were a blur of feeding, changing, and crying. Grace's crying, and my own. My parents stayed with me, a silent, supportive presence, but at night, when the house was quiet except for the soft breathing of my daughter in her bassinet next to my bed, the loneliness was a physical entity. It was a cold, heavy weight on my chest, and I would lie awake and dissect every moment of our relationship, searching for the flaw in the blueprint, the miscalculation that had led to this total structural collapse. Had he ever loved me? Or had I just been a well-executed project, a box to be checked on his life's master plan? NHI's abandonment was absolute. He had vanished. His phone went straight to voicemail. His social media was deleted. His boss at the tech company called me, asking if I knew where he was. He had emailed them his resignation, effective immediately, with no explanation. He had cleared out his personal items from his desk the day before I went into labor. NHE had planned it. This wasn't a spontaneous act of panic. This was a premeditated escape. The realization was a fresh wave of agony. He hadn't just abandoned a failing project. He had sabotaged it and planned his getaway. About a month after Grace was born, a package arrived. It was a large manila envelope with no return address. postmarked from a small town in Oregon I had never heard of. Inside were two things. The first was a set of signed divorce papers, his signature a neat, precise script. The second was a cashier's check for a substantial amount of money. There was no letter, no apology, no explanation, just a legal document and a bank check. It was the final project deliverable from a man who saw life as a series of transactions. He had dissolved our partnership and was now paying out my share. I sank to the floor, the papers in my hand, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief, the heartbreak, the crushing loneliness, they were still there, but underneath them, a new feeling was taking root. A cold, hard, clarifying anger. NHOW, dare he? How dare he think he could just dissolve our life, our child, with a signature and a check? How dare he treat me like a failed business venture to be paid off and forgotten? And I stood up, walked into my home office, and pinned the divorce papers to the corkboard above my desk. I looked at his neat, tidy signature. Then I looked around the room, at the baby monitor on my desk, at the stack of unpaid bills, at the design project I was already late on. And I was a project manager too. My business, my life, my child. And my project wasn't failing. It had just been stripped down to its one essential load-bearing element, me. And I took a deep breath, I sat down at my desk, I opened my laptop, and I started to create a new project plan. Not for a life with him, but for a life without him. It was a plan with one team member, one goal, survival. And I would not fail. In Section 4, building a new structure, NMY anger, became my fuel, my grief the mortar that held me together. I threw myself into my work with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. I took on every project I could get, working late into the night after Grace was asleep, my exhaustion eclipsed by my sheer determination to be independent, to owe him nothing. And I sold the fixer-upper we had bought together, the house that was supposed to be the monument to Team Evans. I couldn't stand to be in it, to see the half-finished projects, the ghosts of our shared plans. I used the money from the sale and his severance check to buy a small, manageable condo in a family-friendly complex. It was mine, every nail, every floorboard. There were no shared memories, no ghosts of a failed partnership. NMY parents were worried. They saw me working myself to the bone, saw the dark circles under my eyes. "You need to rest, Amelia," my mother would plead. "You can't do it all alone." "Watch me," I'd say, my voice tight with a resolve that bordered on obsession. NBUT, I wasn't entirely alone. I had a new team, an unexpected one. It was a team of other mothers, the women I met at the park, in the grocery store, at the pediatrician's office. They were warriors, all of them, each fighting their own quiet battles. When they heard my story, and in a small community, everyone heard it, they didn't offer pity. They offered practical, tangible help. A mom from my condo complex, a lawyer, gave me free legal advice on the divorce. Another, a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids of her own, would offer to watch Grace for an hour so I could have a conference call. They would drop off meals, bags of hand-me-down baby clothes, and most importantly, they would offer a listening ear and a shared understanding that I was not broken. I was just regrouping. And they were my new team. There were no spreadsheets, no laminated plans. It was a team built on shared experience, on unspoken empathy, on the quiet, fierce strength of women who show up for each other. And one of my clients was a woman who was starting a nonprofit to help single mothers re-enter the workforce. She needed a logo, a website, a whole brand identity. As I worked on her project, I became more and more inspired by her mission. She was creating a structured support system for women who had been left, like me, to navigate a chaotic world alone, and I poured my heart into the project. The logo I designed was a stylized image of a single, strong pillar holding up a roof. It was simple, elegant, and deeply personal. NTHE client loved it. "It's perfect," she said, her eyes shining. "It's exactly the message we want to send. That one person, one woman, can be the entire foundation." Looking at that logo, I realized it was my story. I was the pillar. Mark had thought he was the foundation of our team, but he was just scaffolding. And when he was removed, the structure didn't collapse. It stood stronger. Grace grew from a baby into a toddler, a bright, funny, resilient little girl who filled my small condo with laughter. She was my reason, my motivation, my entire world. She was the successful outcome of the project, and every day I was her project manager, her team leader, her everything. And it was enough. I was enough. End section 5. The unscheduled audits in 4 years passed. 4 years of hard work, sleepless nights, and the quiet, profound joy of watching my daughter grow. My design business was thriving. My condo was a home. Grace was a happy, well-adjusted preschooler who knew nothing of the man who had walked out of her life before it had even truly begun. NTHE's story of the husband who walked out of the hospital had become a piece of local lore, a cautionary tale. Mark Evans was a ghost, a name whispered with contempt. I had long since stopped expecting to ever see him again. And then, one rainy Tuesday, the ghost walked into my office. And I had recently leased a small studio space for my business, a step up from my home office. He just appeared in the doorway, dripping wet, holding a ridiculously large bouquet of flowers. NHE was thinner, and the easy confidence he once wore like a well-tailored suit was gone, replaced by a nervous, haunted energy. He looked like a man who had been running for a very long time. "Namelia," he said, his voice raspy, and I felt nothing. No jolt of anger, no pang of sadness. It was like looking at a stranger who vaguely resembled someone I used to know. I stood up from my desk, my heart beating a calm, steady rhythm. "Mark," I said, my voice even, "what are you doing here?" "I came back," he said, as if this were a grand, heroic announcement. "I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. I panicked. I wasn't thinking straight. I've been in therapy. I'd been working on myself. It was a speech, a carefully crafted narrative of regret and redemption. He had probably been practicing it for years. "You didn't panic, Mark," I said, my voice cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "You planned. You cleaned out your desk at work. You had an escape route. A panic is a momentary loss of control. What you did was a project execution." NHE flinched, the truth of my words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The flowers drooped in his hand. "I want to see her," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "She's my daughter. I have a right." "A right?" I repeated, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. "Rights are things you earn, Mark, through presence, through support, through not abandoning your family during a medical emergency. You have no rights here. You have a biological connection, and that is all." NHE took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "Please, Amelia, I'll do anything. I'll pay. I'll go to counseling. I want to be her father. I want to be on the team again." NTHE word hung in the air between us, a pathetic echo of a life that was long dead. "There is no team," I said, the words sharp and final. "There is me, and there is my daughter. We are a self-sustaining structure. You are not a missing component. You are a failed blueprint that was discarded years ago." And I pointed to the door. "I think you should go." NHE stared at me, his face crumbling as he finally realized that the door he had walked out of 4 years ago was not a revolving one. It was locked, and he no longer had the key. NHE left the flowers on the floor of my doorway, a sad, colorful puddle in the gray afternoon, and walked away, back into the rain, a project manager with no project, no plan, and no team. Section 6, the final report. NHE didn't go away quietly. He hired a lawyer and sued for paternity and visitation rights. He was attempting to use the legal system to force his way back into the project he had so spectacularly abandoned. NTHE legal battle was draining, but I was no longer the frightened, heartbroken woman he had left in the hospital. I was a business owner, I was a mother, I was a fighter. I had a team of supportive friends and a brilliant lawyer who was ready for war. Mark's legal argument was that he had suffered a severe mental health crisis, a panic disorder triggered by the trauma of the hospital scene. He claimed he was not of sound mind when he left and that he deserved a chance to make amends. Our argument was simple. We presented the facts. His resignation from his job the day before, the cleared-out desk, the immediate, untraceable disappearance. This was not the behavior of a man in the throes of a panic attack. This was the behavior of a man executing a well-planned escape. NTHE judge, a thoughtful man with tired eyes, listened to both sides. He ordered a psychiatric evaluation for Mark and an interview between Grace and a child psychologist. NTHE psychologist's report was the deciding factor. It stated that Grace was a happy, thriving, well-adjusted child who saw her family as a complete unit of two, herself and her mother. To introduce a stranger father at this stage, it concluded, would be disruptive and potentially traumatic. The report noted, Grace's core structure is sound. Introducing a new, unknown element could destabilize the entire foundation. In the final hearing, the judge looked at Mark with an expression of profound disappointment. Mr. Evans, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of authority. You speak of this event as a single, momentary failure, but what you fail to understand is that parenthood is not a single event. It is a process. It is a project that requires daily, unwavering commitment. You did not just walk out of a hospital. You walked out on every single day of the last 4 years. NHE continued, you are asking the court to force your daughter to be a part of your recovery project. That is not her responsibility. Her only responsibility is to be a child. A responsibility she has been fulfilling beautifully thanks to the unwavering project management of her mother. NHE denied the petition for visitation. He formalized the child support order, backdating it to the day of Grace's birth, and then he delivered the final, crushing blow. You are, by law, her father, but in practice, you are a consultant whose services were terminated for gross negligence. You will have no say in her life, her upbringing, or her future. That project is now and will remain under the sole management of her mother. This case is closed. NTHE gavel fell like a wrecking ball on the last desperate hope he had. The final report was in, and he had failed every metric. In Section 7, the masterpiece in life after the lawsuit was peaceful. The final ghost had been exorcised. The last loose end had been tied up. The project of my life was finally, completely my own. And Grace blossomed. She was a funny, intelligent, and deeply empathetic child. She knew she didn't have a father in the traditional sense, but she never felt a lack. Her life was full of my love, her grandparents, adoration, and the support of our incredible community. NMY business grew. I became known for my clean, strong, minimalist designs, but also for my work with nonprofits and community projects. I helped design a new wing for the local women's shelter, a playground for a low-income neighborhood, and a community center for single parents. I was building structures of support all over the city. One day, when Grace was about 10, she was working on a school project. The assignment was to build a diorama of her family's team. I watched with a lump in my throat, wondering what she would do. NSHE didn't build a diorama with a missing piece. She took a single, strong block of wood and painted it to look like me. Then she took a smaller, brightly colored block and painted it to look like herself. She glued the 2 blocks together, side by side. Then she surrounded them with smaller blocks, each painted with the face of her grandparents, her aunts, her uncles, and the friends who were our chosen family. And at the top of the diorama, she wrote in big, bold letters, Team Grace and Mom. And I looked at her masterpiece, and tears filled my eyes. She hadn't just understood our story, she had celebrated it. She didn't see us as a broken team. She saw us as a complete one, a strong core supported by a loving community. And Mark had seen our life as a project plan that had failed. He was wrong. It was just a draft. The real plan, the master plan, was the one I had been forced to draw up on my own. It was harder, it was lonelier, but the final structure was infinitely stronger, more beautiful, and more resilient than anything he and I could have ever built together. NHE had walked out, thinking the project would collapse. But he had miscalculated. He wasn't the foundation, he was just a line item that had been deleted. The project manager, the architect, and the entire team had been me all along. And the life I had built with my daughter wasn't just a successful project, it was a masterpiece.